Good afternoon. Welcome back to Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a wholly owned subsidiary of Global Media Network LLC. Educate, entertain, and enlighten. And on today's episode of Lest We Forget Historical, we're going to talk about the decline of the birth rate here in the United States. Yes, it is happening all over the world, but we're going to pay particular attention to the United States and what the problem really is. Of course, like anything else, it depends on who you're talking to. The truth sayers, the ones who predict ruin and devastation, war, famine, death, and politicians, let's not forget them. They always have to have and add their 2 cents. Stay tuned and listen to the whole program, and you may even hear a bonus in all of this. You may. But before we go on, this is a quick shout out to Germany and Council Bluffs, Iowa. PWTRN thanks you for your huge response to all of our programs. As I and the Clintons would like to say, content is king. And now back to the program. I've done some research, and I can tell you that the problem of declining births in this nation is nothing new. We seem to go through cycles. And of course, when people are involved in a war, whether declared or otherwise, they lose a lot of man, and in today's military, women power. And although we're very advanced technologically in science and can probably mass produce babies, as far as I know, it's not something that anyone can legally do. So the upshot is we have enough to sustain us for a while. The downside is after a certain amount of time, it will be dangerous and it will destabilize our country. Something else to think about. What does this mean in plain language? Our security will no longer be assured 100%. Or to use the Rotten Tomato scale of whether a film is good enough to see, whether in the theater or streaming or buying it on a CD or copying it, recording it, and putting it on your own storage space. The other side of it is less economic growth, less people, less taxes, less money being brought into the individual city, state, county, village. Yes, something for you to think about. And if you really want to get catastrophic about it, those are some of the long-term economic consequences demographers and economists say the U.S. could face if a potential presidential candidate makes good on a central tenet of his campaign platform, significantly cutting immigration levels and increasing deportations. Oh, yes, you wouldn't think that it would affect our birth rate or the decline of people in the United States. Think again. One of the terms I learned as a teenager was relativity. Everything is relative. Each is dependent and works with, like machinery parts, with one another. And if you're missing one or one is broken and cannot be fixed, well, you've just dug yourself a deeper hole than when you first started out. You want to know the reason for this? By curtailing immigration, it would send shockwaves through the U.S. economy. Why? Oh, come on. Why do we still have immigration and migrant workers in the fields picking our vegetables and fruit and other crops? Because the United States population feels it's beneath them as Americans to do that kind of hard physical labor. Slaves in the cotton fields picking cotton, slaves in the tobacco field picking tobacco, slaves in the sugar fields cutting cane. Come on, folks. Start looking at your history of the United States. You'll need more than just 10 fingers and 10 toes. American economy isn't simply that the nation would be deprived of economic benefits of immigration. It's because the effect of no immigration is the consequences of a shrinking population as fewer American families decide not and to have children. More American families, parents are deciding not to have children. Take a good look around you. If you were in your 20s and early 30s, would you want to bring a kid up in today's economic / financial / military environment? Got qualms? Think about the largest floating plastic island in the ocean. Think about water shortages. Think about states seceding from the Union. A threatened civil war if a potential candidate is not elected to become president a second time. Think about what happens before, and then think about what happens after. A new political awareness is growing around America's record low birth, a debate that's been turbocharged recently by vice presidential candidate Mr. Vance, whose vital comments about childless cat ladies, which malign Americans who don't have children. And he's called the issue catastrophic. Let me spell it out. He's not talking about all babies. He's talking about WHITE babies in particular. All men are created equal, unless you belong to the Republican Party. And some Democrats probably feel the same way. Or as Mr. Vance so importantly said, we had every right to come into the United States of America and kill all indigenous people because they were / are the enemy. That's a peculiar twist of words. I would say that the Europeans were the enemy. But let me not digress. If your society is not having enough children to replace itself, that is profoundly dangerous and destabilizing thing, Mr. Vance said in an interview with Megyn Kelly on Friday. But according to economists, and demographers, immigration is one available answer to failing fertility rates. In fact, according to a January report from the Congressional Budget Office, immigration is almost entirely responsible for keeping the population at a steady rate or growing levels through 2030. 54, even as the U.S. fertility rate continues to fall. Jennifer Tsukuba, a demographer and president and CEO of the Population Reference Bureau, said, and I quote, "I get 3 or 4 journalists calling a week now about low fertility and shrinking populations. People are now seeing that this trend is real and speculating about its impacts. For the population to stay at a steady rate or growing levels, the fertility rate typically has to be at least 2.1 children per woman. But after peaking in the 1960s, for decades in the United States and many other countries, the fertility rate has been falling. In the United States, the number of births decreased 3% from 2022, according to the most recent data collected by the Centers for Disease Control, bringing the rate down to 1.6 births per woman over the course of a lifetime. That's far below the rate needed to keep the U.S. population at replacement levels. While many other developed nations are beginning to battle the demographic effects of a shrinking and aging population, the U.S. has been spared so far because of the role new immigrants play in keeping the population at steady state levels, or in some projections growing even as the number of native-born births falls. And what's the Statue of Liberty all about? Give me your hungry, give me your poor. Well, fellow Americans, if you don't want to accept immigrants into your country, and immigrants, which is what the Europeans were, along with Christopher Columbus and a few other infamous explorers, they were immigrants coming to this country during the 1800s and 1900s, immigrants still coming to this country, then we need to remove the Statue of Liberty and give it back to France. Just a thought. Jagadish Gohal, a director of special projects for the Wharton Budget Model at the University of Pennsylvania and a former senior fellow at the libertarian-leaning Cato Institute, has built demographic models that show the huge growth impacts that immigration has had and is projected to have on the nation's population levels. According to his modeling, if accounting only for births and deaths in the U.S. population would begin to fall in the 2030s, 6 years off. But if immigration into the country is included, the population rate stays steady and even continues to grow throughout the rest of the century. He also studies the fiscal health of programs like Social Security and Medicaid, and he said that the modeling makes some assumptions, such as the current surge in immigration will abate in the next few years. And he acknowledges that it's difficult to get exact numbers about the extent of immigration, especially illegal immigration. He says, quote, "Immigration helps fill in the gap," adding that the fertility rate has dipped even further below the replacement rate since the Great Recession. If immigration rate is sustained, it will help maintain population growth. All these factors suggest that immigration, at least for the next few years, is going to be a factor that will offset the low fertility rate then we project. And next week, we will continue discussing about how immigration makes a big impact on us, whether we want to believe it or not. So, for the Republican candidates who want to shut down immigration and deport millions of people, just remember this. You're not only hurting them, you're hurting the economics and security of the nation that you want to make great again, quote unquote. This program, Lest You Forget, with your host Lillian Cauldwell, was brought to you by The Obstacles of Podcast Training. Please check out our website. It explains in full detail what you can get, how long the course is, what the investment is, and how you too can air your 3 podcasts on PWTRN, plus do an internship, plus eventually become part of our team. The website is https://educate.passionateworldtalkradio.com/masterclass, and also brought to you by Ruby, RUBI.ai. Have you ever wanted to have a smorgasbord? And for those who don't know what a smorgasbord is, it means that every type of food, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, and everything in between is on that table. And you can start with dessert first and work your way backwards, or whatever you want, how you want it, and how much you can eat it. And Ruby.ai does the same thing. So check us out at https://esc73.try, T-R-Y, Ruby, RUBI.ai, and see what one of the Shark Tank's people, Mark Cuban, has to say about it. Basically, he says, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. But I have a more breathtaking message. You're in the 21st century. It's a verbal and visual world. If you cannot communicate outside of texting, as they say, you're up Schitt's Creek, or what I finally refer to as sugar honey iced tea creek. Thank you very much for listening. You can hear everything again over at youtube.com/PWR network and PWT Talk Radio, or over at https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. Thank you all very much for listening. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Friday.